Today we'll be discussing about the First Amendment to the Indian Constitution. Under this, we'll be discussing about what led to the First Amendment, which means historical context. We'll also discuss about what were the key provisions introduced through First Amendment. The significance and the objectives of First Amendment will also be discussed, and the criticism and the impact of First Amendment will also be discussing this. It was the year 1951, in the month of June, when the First Amendment to the Indian Constitution was done. Why was it done is the next question. So the government was trying to do various things in order to bring reforms in Indian society. They were bringing land reforms. They were curbing the freedom of speech and expression in order to maintain public order in the society. They were bringing or they were taking affirmative actions in the form of reservation to in order to improve the status of backward classes of the Indian society. So these actions were being done by the government in order to reform the society. So the constitution was hindering the reforms of the government through judiciary because judiciary is there to interpret the constitution as it is. So the government back then tried to amend the constitution so that they can align the constitution with their objectives of reforming the Indian society. So this was the historical context why the first amendment to the Indian constitution was brought in. Now let's talk about what were the key provisions introduced through first amendment. So the major provisions were introduced regarding land reforms and property rights. The government has created a new schedule that was ninth schedule, and ninth schedule has a peculiarity that laws placed under the schedule were shielded from judicial review, which means the laws which are there in ninth schedule will not be reviewed by the judiciary. So the government started placing the laws like land reform, which were intended to abolish Jamindari system under ninth schedule. And now judiciary will no longer be able to review those laws. If the judiciary is not able to review those laws, it will not be able to declare those laws as unconstitutional. So Article 31B, which was right to property, and it was a fundamental right, it was put into the ninth schedule. The second major provision was regarding the restrictions on freedom of speech under Article 19. So now the government has introduced a clause that was reasonable restrictions on freedom of speech and expression. The government can restrict your freedom of speech and expression if it is violating public order, if it is hampering the friendly relations with foreign state, and if it is inciting any violence or incitement to an offense, then the government can restrict your freedom of speech and expression. And with this, the government has achieved the objective of balancing the freedom of speech and expression with national security and public order. The third major provision was regarding social justice and reservation under Article 15, where the government added fourth clause, which empowered the state to make special provisions for the advancement of socially and educationally backward classes, which means the government now can reserve certain percentage of seats for those who are socially or educationally backward. And with this, the government has promoted the equality through affirmative action. Now we'll talk about the significance and objectives of the First Amendment. The first significance is that the First Amendment strengthened the socialist vision of our constitution makers. Now, the government has the power to redistribute land and resources. The second significance is that ensured welfare measures. Now the government can reserve certain percentage of seats for those who are marginalized, which will in turn facilitate welfare of the community. The third significance is that maintained public order. Now the state has the power to curb the misuse of free speech. The fourth point we are going to discuss is the criticism of the First Amendment. The first and the major criticism is regarding judicial review. When the ninth schedule was added to the Indian Constitution through First Amendment, many people believe that it has diluted the power of the judiciary to check the validity of the law. The judicial review, which is the basic feature or the basic tool of the judiciary, it has been snatched away. And many people believe that this amendment has undermined the doctrine of separation of powers. The second criticism is that the First Amendment it has hampered the scope of the freedom of speech. It has given the state excessive powers to control the speech and expression of the people. Now let's talk about the impact of First Amendment. So the First Amendment paved the way for landmark land reforms across India. It has strengthened the government's ability to implement welfare policies, and it has also set a precedent for balancing individual rights and collective welfare. With this, we are done with the First Amendment to the Indian Constitution.